Hi, hope you enjoy the last session of short question answers in brief. Today we move on with the long question answers in detail. So let's begin session number 8 of French Revolution. We have one more session for the same. Let's begin with the question answers. How was French society organized? What privileges did certain section of the society enjoy or describe? Even it could be asked in different forms. Social disparity were one of the major causes of the French Revolution, justified by the given example. Question asked regarding the society structure of France at that time before French Revolution. So we just need to consider those points. Here the first point could be division of the society into 3 states. Yes, there is first state which is considered of clergy, church father, priest. Now the second state is considered of landlord, men of noble birth and aristocrat. Now the third state is considered with the vast majority of common masses, the landless, peasants, servants, workers, businessmen and all that. Now the second point come here is the heavy burden of taxes on the third state. The member of the first two states were exempted from paying taxes, right? So all the taxes were paid by the people of the third state. Now the next point, wide gap between different state. Most of the people of the third state were employed as a labor in a workshop with fixed wages. The wages failed to keep the pace with the rise in the price, so the gap between the poor and the rich widened. बहुत ज़्यादा गैप दिख रहा था अमीरी और गरीब लोगों के बीच में. And the standard of living is obviously down. Will be no political right, not right to vote, not even right to enter into the assembly. So out of the total population, the first and the second state have share of 2% of the remaining people belong to the third state. Although the upper two classes made up only a small fraction of the total population, yet there were people who controlled the political and economic system of the nation. They enjoyed all the rights and privileges. The entire machinery of the government was designed to protect the interests and privileges given to them by birth. Wealth distribution among each state, each people is also be irregular, irrespective to each other. In the French society, peasants made up of around 90% of the population, who control a small number of their own land in which their cultivation is doing, and the rest of about 60% of the land would be owned by the nobles, churches and riches who didn't pay, who were exempted from the taxes. Move to another question. Explain the role of thinkers and philosophers in the French Revolution. We basically talk about the three main philosophers who influenced the people of France totally. Influencing of philosophers and writers, there were many French philosophers and thinkers like John Locke, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Voltaire, Mirabeau, who exposed the evil prevailing in the system. They infused people with the idea of liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice. Charles Montesquieu, a nobleman by birth, he became a lawyer and a judge. In his book, The Spirit of Law, he criticized autocracy and praised the democratic republic. He praised democratic republic based on the fundamental rights given to the common people, common masses. Now the another one is Voltaire. Voltaire's full name is Francis Aronet Voltaire. He is around 1694 to 1778. Voltaire was another outstanding philosopher of the revolution. He wanted the people to think about the material life on earth and forget about heaven. Basically talk about the natural products being taken from the earth and given back to them and forget about the luxury life. He considered the churches which supported the privileged class and ignored the poor. That's happened. Now next one is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. 1712 to 1778. Philosophers is regarded as the architect of French Revolution. He gave the slogan "Man was born free, yet he is everywhere in the chain." Purna Swaraj by Tilak. In the famous book The Social Contract, he proved that the government was the result of social contract between the people on the one hand and the ruler on the other. If ruler were not able to fulfill our need, our demand, so we just right to withdraw him without any possibility to give up him a chance again and again. Like the same we are doing in our elections. After 5 years, if we not like that much that particular representative, we withdraw him. We are not giving vote to them in that same form. One is John Locke. He was also a great political thinker. He wrote 2 treatises of government in which he sought to refute the doctrine of the divine and absolute right of monarch. पूरी तरह से monarch के उसमें रहना, absolute divine में रहना. He considered it is not worthy, it's not right. These are some philosophers who really meant for the French society, and France people greatly influenced from these peoples. So the rights which we are enjoying today has the origin in the outbreak of French Revolution. Let's move to another question. Explain the event that led to the insertion of 1972 in France. So the event could be held in that form that Louis XVI called assembly to revise the taxes. Basically, taxes revising could be happen as a burden increases on third state. So they called the representatives. So the first 2 states sent their 300 representatives each, who sit on opposite sides, the front row, and the third state representatives are 600. So they were standing on back side. King Louis XVI were continue the same practice, the same proposal, but the third state member were demanding for the voting right now. They could be considered that the assembly as a whole, but now the third state want one vote, one right, which were being rejected through the king. That proposal could be rejected through the king. So the third state walk out of the assembly in the protest, and they assemble into the indoor tennis court of Versailles. There they considered themselves as a national assembly and draft a constitution. I just considered some more points here, and they are that the third state, only those who are educated, those who are rich, are allowed to enter into the assembly. Women's and other men's like peasants, workers, laborers were not allowed to enter into the assembly. In that same way, they also don't have any right of voting. The National Assembly, the representative of the third state, viewed themselves as a spokesperson for whole French nation. On 20th June, they assembled in the hall of indoor tennis court, as I told you. So they declared themselves as a National Assembly, and so not to disperse that, they have drafted a constitution for the France could limit the power of monarch. They were led by Mirabeau and Abbe says. So the turmoil in France were begin. While the National Assembly was busy at Versailles drafting the constitution, the rest of France seated with the turmoil due to bad harvest. There is shortage of food grains as per the population increases from 3 million to 28 million. So the food grains also need to increase. There could be shortage in food grain. So the crops and food product were hiked. The prices were hiked, and the merchants and the business and the shopkeepers were enjoying that profit instead of denying those profit. During these storming fever, people were outraged on King Louis, and the nobles were migrate away another region, another country, neighboring countries. and the women were storming onto the shopkeeper for asking the bread. Now the storming being happened in the form, so they only outrage the people, only outrage on the king. So on 14 July 1789, the agitated crowd stormed and destroyed the Bastille. Under all the circumstances, Louis XVI finally accorded recognition to the National Assembly. France became republic. No, France became constitutional monarchy now. So in 1792, the Jacobins held the kings hostage and declared to form a new government. The newly elected assembly was called the Convention on 21st September 1792. It abolished the monarch and declared France as republic. Have some another question. Explain the role of Mirabeau and Abbe in the French Revolution. So this one is the hot question. Both Mirabeau and Abbe were a great political thinker. They were the leader of the National Assembly, which was formed in 1789 after the failure of meeting of the State Journal. Mirabeau was born in a noble family but was convinced to the need to do away with the society of feudal privileges. He brought out a journal and delivered powerful speech to the crowd assembled at Versailles. Abbe was originally a priest who wrote an influential pamphlet called What is the Third Estate? And these are some points which includes regarding the role of these two political thinkers. Get answer of number 5. Each triangle slave trade carried on during 18th and 19th century. So the triangular slave trade was carried between Europe, Africa and America. When you consider it on your map, they form a triangle. So this slave trading could be happen between Europe, Africa and America. Basically from Africa, peoples were caught and exploited. They would be buyed. It is called in Hindi बंधुआ मजदूर, जहाँ पर हम जो लेबर्स होते हैं, कामगार होते हैं, उनको हम खरीद लेते हैं पैसे दे के हम पैसे देकर उनको खरीद लेते हैं एंड हम उनको कुछ भी पे नहीं करते. We not pay him a single penny. So here the slave trade began in the 17th century. The French merchants sailed from the port of Bordeaux or Nantes to the African coast, where they bought slaves from local chieftains, branded and shackled. The slaves were packed tightly into the ship for 3-month long voyage across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. They were sold to plantation owner. Now, the exploitation of the slaves' labor made it possible to meet the growing demand in European market for sugar, coffee and indigo. Port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes owed their economic prosperity to the flourishing slave trade. So these are some common examples which come in this question. Another question number 6. Evaluate the importance of following year and considered in French Revolution. So just consider with the dates. 1774 में क्या हुआ था? Louis XVI ascended the throne of France. He believed in the divine right theory of king. He had no respect for the freedom of liberty, fraternity, equality. Because of his empty treasury, he began to impose heavy taxes on the third estate. This could be disliked by the common masses. Now in 1789, French Revolution outbreak हुआ था. In 1789, it was considered with the convocation of the State Journal in May. The French year of Revolution proclaimed the tennis court oath, assault on the Declaration of Right of Men and Citizens. The State Journal was called together by Louis XVI to pass proposal for the new taxes. 1791 में क्या हुआ? The Constitution of 1791, National Assembly drafted a new constitution who limit the power of monarch, and the power were divided into the 3 institutions, which is legislative, executive and judiciary. So the National Assembly churches land to pay off the different debates were stopped and privileges given to the classes were banned, and the privileges given to them by birth is also be limited. In 1804, Napoleon became the Emperor of France. He declared himself as an emperor due to the instability in political form of French due to done by directory. So the military dictatorship in front and headed by Napoleon Bonaparte, who himself considered as a king, as an emperor of France. In 1815, the French Revolution appeared nullified. By 1815, the land-owning classes and the bourgeois emerged as the dominant power. Napoleon was defeated in the Battle of Waterloo. Many of these measures that carried the revolutionary idea of liberty and modern laws to other parts of Europe had an impact on the people long after Napoleon had left. Next question. Describe the condition of women during the period of French Revolution. So I just considered some points here. Working women had take care of their family. Their wages were low and than those of men, so they just want to increase their standard of living. They did not have access to education or job training. Only daughters from the wealthier member of the third estate could stay at own their convenience. They demand the right to vote, to be elected to the assembly and hold political office. They started their own political club newspaper in order to voice their interests. They were employed as a domestic servant in the houses of prosperous people. Most women of the third estate had to work for a living seamlessly, or a laundress, or a fruit seller, vegetable seller, or a maid. In the market, they sell vegetables, fruits, flowers, like that. From the very beginning, women were active participants in the event, which brought major changes in the French society. Olympus de Gouges is one of the revolutionary women who fight for the women's right to vote, right to access education, right to divorce, right to marriage. These are some of the points. So here we rest our today's session. We will meet you tomorrow with the NCERT exercises, and please don't forget to subscribe this channel.